Hello, and welcome back to High Vibe Table Talks. Today, in season 7, we are talking about wrapping things up for the end of the year to get ready to bounce into 2025. It's kind of wild to think that we are um, like more than halfway through Q4 and that like next week is Thanksgiving and that actually Thanksgiving is really late this year, so we have a really short amount of time between Thanksgiving and Christmas and just the chaos of the holidays. And I really like to take that time of the holidays to be in the holiday spirit. I get my Christmas tree Friday after Thanksgiving, and then that whole day is like taking the whole house apart and doing all like Christmas. And so I'm actually going to be repurposing a couple of episodes that I think are really impactful throughout the holiday season, but it also will help me take some time to be in the moment, spend time with family, things like that. But I wanted to take a little bit of time before we get into that to do actually two separate reflection episodes. And this one is going to be kind of the macro look at how 2024 has been for me. And then the next one is actually going to be a micro look and getting into some KPIs, key performance indicators. And so I really wanted this episode to be, how do I feel as we're wrapping up the year? And like, what are some big, like, intrinsic feelings that I have about the year, and not like um the data, but just like looking internally. I did have like quite a year. It turned out very differently than I thought. I have a lot of lessons, and as I was doing some reflecting and pulling together this episode, I actually came up with 5 topics that I want to kind of use as starting points for my lessons from the year. Again, they're very much like about how the year felt. And actually, um, the last lesson is going to be um, a big um, event that just happened and how I'm reflecting on that and using it in my business. So stay tuned for the last one, but there are 5 lessons that I want to take in as far as like how do I feel about me, myself, my business as I'm wrapping up the year and how I want to take those into next year. One of the episodes I'm going to be repurposing is my 2024 guide to creating a vision board. That's going to come out New Year's Day. So make sure you stay tuned for that one. I always love doing it. I will be doing it again this year. I also do a um, workshop where I go through this workbook that helps you reflect on the year. If you're interested in that, let me know. I love having people join that, and it's a really fun exercise to go through. I am rambling on, but let's get into the macro lessons and kind of, um, yeah, macro lessons that I have learned this year as we wrap up. I kind of wanted this to be like a North Star. Looking back on like what I wanted my North Star goal to be of 2024. And again, like it's interesting. I've been doing some like research on North Star and what that means, and I'm taking it into both High Vibe, as well as I do some consulting for this other business, and we're talking about North Star goals. And we really wanted to kind of define it because a lot of times it can be this like North Star. How I kind of see it is it helps me filter out yeses and nos throughout the year. I think I talked about on this podcast previously about how I had this North Star goal of us having the house we now live in. We didn't know what it looked like, we didn't know exactly where it was, but it helped me say yes or no in my daily, weekly, monthly actions because if I said yes to these things, would I be saying no to us buying our home? And so it really helped me in saying yes or no to certain things, like going to Paris. I said no to going to Paris with some friends because if I had spent that money, we may have lost out on this house. It allowed me to say yes to checking in on my credit score every week. But in doing some research, I've found that North Star can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And so I'd like you to define it for yourself. I think it's a little bit different than goals because it's a little bit more vague. It's a little bit bigger picture. Again, we didn't know what this house was going to look like, exactly where it was, but I just had this like, I knew that eventually it would show up and I had to be able to say yes to it when it did. I was listening to a Mel Robbins episode, and I actually really like Mel Robbins a lot. I like her content. I like what she stands for. I like her podcast a lot. And her definition of North Star goal, if you go and listen to the episode, it's very different than what I think. It's more of this like having a person in mind that you want to be like, and then acting as if, and then putting your own twist on how you think they would act. That's kind of the general gist of it. Obviously, it's like a 50-minute long podcast. I broke it down into like a sentence. So it's much more in depth than that. But that really resonated with her. And after listening to that episode, it did not resonate with me. And so I kind of like to think about North Star um, like um, the Avengers and Thor specifically, because in one of the Avengers, I always forget which one, but he talks about how Asgard is a feeling, not a place. And so it's much more about like not the specific destination I want to be in, but more of like how I want to feel and how I want to show up and how I want to like have my legacy be built. And that's much different, I think, in my opinion, than, okay, this is the person that I want to emulate. This is the life that I think I want to live like. And then how can I do that every day? Um, for me, it's just much more like internal. And so as I've been doing reflecting on this year, it's been really interesting because um, I had such a big year, but not in the way that I had anticipated in like December, January you know, December 2023 and January of 2024. So I'll start with my word of the year that I really wanted to live into, and it was bloom. And I wanted to bloom, and part of why I chose that as my word is because I wanted to like find rest and grounding and dig deeper into like my home, myself, the things that make me feel whole, as well as like open up and be vibrant and showing up vibrantly in the places that I felt were important. And do I think that I lived up to that word this year? And I will say the answer is no. I don't think that I did, but I'm happy that I didn't. And this kind of like goes into the next thing I'm going to talk about as far as like failing and being happy about it. Um, but if you've listened to this podcast over the past 6 months, you've probably heard me talk about my diagnosis with ADHD and anxiety, and why I'm really okay with not having lived into the word bloom this year is because um, that grounding took a lot more than I was expecting. I really had to go in, I really had to be very self aware, very much like putting up some boundaries around like what space I need for myself, for my family, for my well being, for my mental health. It's funny because when I was first going to talk to my doctor about um, my ADHD diagnosis, he wrote on there because I saw it after. He didn't tell me, but he wrote after, like on the notes, like could potentially be anxiety. And I read that after I was at my computer, and I wanted to like print it out and throw it at him. Like, you do not know what you're talking about. How dare you speak to me that way? Um, but then after he said that, I really started to look at the words that I was using and how I was feeling during different scenarios and different parts of my life. And I was like, "Uh, oh, so yeah, that's anxiety. That's what that is." And so, um, the second half of bloomed is like being vibrant and showing up. And I to be diagnosed with ADHD and then um anxiety on top of that, and we're still trying to figure out what is showing up where. But I couldn't show up vibrantly when I was like coming to terms with who I am as a human, as an anxious human being. Like having anxiety was a huge blow to like who I felt like I was as a person. And this is much more in depth than I planned on going because this is what I'm talking out in therapy. But like, I love that I'm a go with the flow person. And I feel like one of the personality traits that I have that it's like very easygoing and I'll do whatever. And like, again, very go with the flow. And that feels very at friction with what I perceive as anxiety. That is work that I am unpacking and unlearning, but all of that is like underground work. I have showed up very vulnerable and I have spoken about my diagnosis and I've talked about the struggles I'm having with it. But do I think that that's showing up vibrantly? No. I think that is being vulnerable and part of me coming into acceptance of who I am and where I am in this season of life. And that feels like a lot of grounding work. It doesn't feel very vibrant, but that is so necessary. And um it just feels like I needed much more of the grounding experience than I had initially expected to December of last year, January of this year, because I first like went to my doctor for this diagnosis in January of this year. And so it hasn't even been a full year since even like having my first appointment with my doctor about this being a potential thing I'm struggling with. Um, so I really needed to like hunker down. So do I feel like I have bloomed? No. And I have so much, I'm honoring that for myself. So lesson number two is, as you again have, if you've listened to this podcast, you have seen previously that I put something down, which was my masterminds, so that I could really lean into my sales course that I am currently promoting and working through. And it was really hard to do that. And I, will link that episode in the show notes because I go much more in depth. But even only like a couple months out, I'm really glad that I did it because just the act and the using of the muscles of putting it down so that I can create space for something else. I always am a proponent of other people doing it. And I really like stepped into that and was like, okay, walk the walk. Because that was how I was bringing money in to my business. And have I replaced that money at this current moment? No. Um, I don't know exactly what, I have I do have a goal of where I would like to be this time next year in my business. And so I'm currently creating building blocks of the type of business that I would like to see this time next year. Will it all pan out? I have no idea, but I do really think that going through that exercise and putting something down, it's not like I was bringing in tens and hundreds of thousands of dollars from this and stepped away, but it was how I brought in a majority of my money from my business, and I stepped away from it because I really felt called to create space for something else. And I'm so, so glad that I did. It was excruciating in the moment. It was very hard, but the practice of it and the thought process and the detachment of the emotions around it. I remember when the second person said, "Hey, I don't have the bandwidth to stay with the mastermind in this moment." And I was like, "I think this is a sign." And it was saying it out loud. The first person I told when I said out loud that I think this is a sign to like step away was my dad. And I like started crying on the phone. And again, he was like, "Who's dying? What's going on?" Because I'm nothing if not a little bit of a dramatic crier. Um, but I'm so glad that I went through that process and did that. Um, and I'm not totally on the other side of this, but I'm very much about showing the messy middle. I'm still in the messy middle, but it feels like it was really the right thing to do. And at some point, I will pick it back up again. I just needed to put it down for a second and just take a breath, create some space, and do what feels right next. Okay, so that's number two. Saying no and putting something down was such a great practice for me. Number three, one of the big lessons that I have learned this year is to front load to find balance. I found it by accident with this podcast. Accident's not the right word, but like January, February, March of this past year with my podcast, I overloaded on guest episodes. And like by the middle of March, I had all my guest episodes recorded through like July. And I was like, okay, cool. And then April hit and my life was a whirlwind. I remember like being prepared for how stressful it was because 2 years ago my spring was really stressful and like overloaded. Um but even being prepared, I was still like, what the F just happened? What is my life? And so I was really happy that I front loaded all of those guest episodes because I don't know how I would have managed. Um and so I'm taking that as a lesson. Um you know, one of the things with like an ADHD brain is the hyper focus and like doing things during the dopamine spikes. It's kind of crazy because this past Saturday I had like for whatever reason a huge I was on just a dopamine high. I don't know how to explain it other than I was just like I need to do all of the things. And like the Saturday before, I was like I need to be a slug on this couch. Um and we had um like two birthday parties. We got home from the birthday parties. I took everything, like a ton of stuff out of the garage and then moved in a lacrosse our lacrosse bounce back and lacrosse goals and like organized the garage so that like Rowan can play lacrosse pretty much all year and we have space and da 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 and like just it's a pretty cool space now in the garage. And then I was like, and we're going to watch a movie. So I set up the outdoor projector for the first time, got everything going with that, made homemade popcorn, started a fire. So we watched a movie by the fire as we had popcorn. And it was just like I did all of the things. And then I took it all down when we were done. Um, and I was like, what just happened? And it was great, and it actually one of the best things was okay, nope. I had therapy today. I thought I got my tears out. Um, but it was just like um during the movie, Rowan went in and got like candy and she brought out Sour Patch Kids for me because they're my second favorite candy. And she gave me a huge hug and was like, thank you so much. Jeez. Hmm. Thank you so much for setting up this movie and the garage today. Like, it was really, really great. So it was all worth it. Okay. Anyways, um, so front loading. Um, I have found that to be really effective, like with making lunch. So on Sundays, I'll make like a big dense bean salad and I'll have that for lunch throughout the week. And it's like things that are so like I think I think for neurotypical people, they feel very obvious. For neurodivergent people, they can feel like a heavy lift. But I do want to reflect on how good they did make me feel because I want to use that to like make sure that I continue to do those things. There are certain ones that are it's not really possible to front load. Sometimes I'm like, I'm gonna get all this cleaning done on Sunday so I don't have to clean, and then I just everything's these huge tasks that I have to overtake instead of doing like the small, minuscule, or minor things throughout the week that don't lead to laundry being 5 loads. Um, so front loading can create a lot of balance. You can't do it with everything, but the things that you can do them with, do your best to do it. Um, and that kind of leads into number 4. I think I'm on 4. I jumped around in the order that I wrote these down in. Number 4 is this year I found so much grace for myself and my brain. I kind of talked about this in the first one where I talked about do I feel bloomed? No. Um, But kind of going back to the garden metaphor when I'm thinking about I wanted to like reach down, ground myself and be vibrant, like I kind of felt like for the past 36 years I was planted and trying to grow in clay, and I needed to pick myself up and move to a much more rich soil. Like my roots were trying to grow, and it was just kept going into clay. It just wasn't working. So, but then the grace was moving over to this rich soil that was the environment that I needed to thrive in. And to think that that would immediately lead to being vibrant instead of being like, okay, this is a safe place for me to like really latch on was an overreach. I don't want to say unfair because I didn't know what I didn't know, and I didn't realize like how deeply I was feeling a lot of these things. Um and so the grace for my brain has been really spectacular, and um I'm still very much figuring things out and how to like best nurture myself, nurture my routine, what makes my brain like tick, um, and it not being like the neurotypical of like this is how things get done, and um, even detaching myself from like you're not anxious. This is an anxious thought. First, I had to even realize I was having the anxiety, and now I'm like separating like you are not anxious, you're just having anxiety at the moment, and how can we divert or use grounding techniques or do these different coping mechanisms that I am putting in my toolbox to work through it, and also not to run away from it. Like that is a huge shift that I have made this year, is not running away from my emotions, my feelings, my um how my brain and body are processing things. It's like, okay, we're going to process this. So let's sit with it and really dissect it. Um which in order to do so you have to have so much grace and understanding. And I really think that I have stepped into that this year, and I would love if anybody listening to this feels like they are doing things wrong, they're bad at something in their life, I want this to be a message of grace because I think we all need a little bit of grace. Um, Life is hard, no matter what you're building. Um, there are low moments and there are struggles and there are things that you're going to run into. And instead of like beating yourself down, finding some grace in it is really, really beneficial. So, um, I'm really happy with where I am on that journey, and I want to continue to like lean into that. Um, but I think I needed, to sit in the rich soil a little bit longer than I had anticipated before kind of going into the vibrant part, which is 2025 the year for that? Here's to hoping. And that kind of gets me into number 5. And I kind of teased this at the beginning about a big event that happened and how it has changed. I don't know if changed my mindset is right, but just given me this different. motivation, and that is the election. Um, I don't think I have talked about the election on the podcast. I've about it a little bit on my social media. Um, I was very hopeful for a Kamala Walls presidency in 20, you know, uh, 2024 election of 2024. Um, are they perfect candidates? Of course not. There's no such thing as a perfect candidate. But I do feel very strongly that um, having another President Trump term is going to be detrimental to our country as a whole. I honestly believe that. I am, you know, the anxiety flare has been high. And I'm going to say this as, um, I am a cis, hetero, white female in a blue state in a happy marriage with, um, an income and a roof over my head, and groceries are tight, but I don't like, not like missing meals. Like, I am saying this from a place of high privilege, but I feel like um, the empathy for our country is just at a low, and I'm anxious about how these next 4 years are going to go for a lot of people in our country. I'm not going to go too in depth with that, because what I did find is that a lot of my community that I have built, both in my life and my business, feel similarly, which feels really cool. Um, but what the motivation it has given me is that um, I need to make my time now, and I need to make this business as profitable as I can, because I am ready to pour as much money as I can into the things that I care deeply about, the causes, the elections, I want to put my money where my mouth is with a lot of these things that I care deeply about. And so maybe that's the motivation I needed for the vibrant piece to show up and start showing up unapologetically, and really letting the fear hold me back no longer, because we need to make some changes, and want there to be, I want to feel like I have put my resources into this company, into other women growing businesses, because so that they can make as much money and pour into their causes as deeply as they can. Like, we're coming up on the holidays, and I want as much of my dollar to be spent on local small women owned businesses as possible. Like, as high of a percentage of my money that can go towards that for the holidays, that's what I want. And um I think that the biggest impact we can have around our community is at the local level. And so that starts with buying from local small owned businesses and supporting your small business Saturday is coming up, and doing all the things that affect your community locally, and then taking it bigger. And of course, like, um I want to see a women president, and the next time that that is a possibility, I would love to give as much as I can to that cause, more than I could at this moment. And so one of those ways is I'm going to start to really just take off the imposter syndrome, um and start showing up like a mediocre white man, because they seem to show up with little worry about if they're worthy. And so that's what I'm going to do. Okay. I hope this was helpful. One of the things is that I like to use this podcast even like as a log of like where I am at the moment. And many of you resonate with it. You tell me that like you feel like you're having a conversation with a friend, which is really, really cool. And so I hope that even though this was about my year, I hope you found some lessons in it and feel ready to reflect on your year. Again, this was a very macro level, and I'm going to do a micro level and KPIs, data, things like that in the next solo episode. Um, so stay tuned for that. And until next time, remember that big dreams and small steps will transform your life.